He stood barefoot behind the stage, toes curling slightly against the cold concrete floor as if trying to remember what warmth felt like. The hallway buzzed with motion, assistants rushing past with headsets, performers pacing, nervous laughter echoing off metal doors, but none of it seemed meant for him. He existed in the margins, pressed against the wall with his shoulders hunched, clutching a dented paper cup that still smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee. It wasn't for donations now, it was simply something to hold, something that reminded him his hands had a purpose. His clothes were clean but worn thin, washed too many times in sinks and public restrooms. The jacket hung loose on his frame, the zipper broken halfway, the lining frayed like it had tried to escape. Someone had once told him to dress presentable for auditions, but homelessness didn't come with costume options. He had chosen the least damaged version of himself and hoped it would be enough. A production assistant glanced at his audition number, then at his face, then away again. Her smile was polite, professional, empty. He recognized that look. People used it when they didn't want to ask questions they were afraid of answering. Another contestant nearby warmed up loudly, running scales, drawing attention. Cameras floated past like curious insects, lenses stopping for dramatic faces, confident smiles, polished dreams. None paused for him. He shifted his weight, wincing as a familiar ache shot through his heel. Shoes were a luxury he'd learned to live without months ago. They wore out too quickly on the streets, and bare feet told fewer lies. Still, he wondered what the judges would think when they saw him walk out like this. He wondered if they would even listen. A young intern with a clipboard approached, eyes scanning the page. "What's your song?" she asked, already half turned away. "The Prayer," he said softly. She blinked, finally looking at him. Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction. "Okay," she said after a beat, making a note. Her tone suggested surprise, maybe doubt. He didn't blame her. Most people expected him to rap, or to shout, or to sing something loud enough to distract from the rest of him. As she walked off, a flicker of memory stirred, his mother humming that same song while washing dishes late at night, the radio crackling, her voice steady even when money wasn't. He hadn't sung it in years, not properly. On the streets, music was usually about volume, about coins hitting concrete. This was different. This was sacred to him. A stage manager finally called his number. The sound of it echoed too loudly in his chest. He took a breath, slow and deliberate, the way he'd taught himself during long nights when panic threatened to swallow him whole. He told himself this was just another room, another chance. Still, his hands trembled. As he walked toward the stage entrance, the noise of the theater seeped through the curtain, murmurs, laughter, impatience. He caught a glimpse of bright lights and polished judges' desks. For a moment, doubt clawed at him. He could still turn around. No one would stop him. No one ever did, but then he remembered the nights singing to keep himself awake so his backpack wouldn't be stolen. The mornings when his voice was the only thing that still felt like his. He remembered promising himself that if he ever stood in front of people who might truly listen, he wouldn't waste it by disappearing. The curtain brushed his shoulder as he stepped forward. The lights were blinding, the silence heavier than hunger. Somewhere in the crowd, someone cleared their throat. He tightened his grip on the paper cup one last time, then set it down beside the stage like an offering. When he lifted his head, his eyes were calm. They saw a homeless man. They had no idea what they were about to hear. The first note left his mouth almost shyly, as if it needed permission to exist. It hovered in the air, fragile and pure, and for a split second a few people in the audience shifted in their seats, unsure whether this was going to fall apart. Then the note settled, deepened, and found its strength. His voice wasn't loud, it was precise, controlled, and impossibly steady, like someone placing a hand on your chest and asking you to breathe with them. The judges glanced at one another, surprise flashing across their faces before they could hide it. One of them leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes narrowing, not in doubt, but in focus. This was not the sound they had expected from the man standing barefoot under the lights, wearing a jacket that had clearly lived a harder life than most people in the room. As he continued, the melody unfolded gently, each phrase shaped with care. There was no rush, no desperation to impress. He sang as if time had slowed just for him, as if the world had finally agreed to listen. His voice carried warmth and restraint at once, the kind that comes not from training alone but from restraint learned the hard way. Every vowel rang clean, every breath taken exactly where it needed to be. Somewhere in the audience, a whispered conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman near the aisle raised her hand to her mouth, eyes glistening, though she didn't yet know why. The sound wasn't just beautiful, it was honest. It carried weight, as though each word had been paid for in full. When he reached the first rise in the song, the one that often breaks less disciplined singers, he didn't push. He opened. The note bloomed naturally, filling the theater without strain, soaring but never shouting. The acoustics caught it and sent it rolling back to the stage, wrapping around him like an answer. For the first time since he'd walked out, he allowed himself a small breath of confidence. The orchestra track swelled behind him, but it didn't swallow his voice. He stood still, shoulders relaxed, eyes lifted just above the judges' heads, as if singing to something unseen beyond the lights. His hands no longer trembled. They hung at his sides, grounded, as though the stage itself was holding him up. A judge swallowed hard, blinking faster than usual. Another slowly removed their glasses, pressing them against the desk, clearly forgetting the cameras. This was no longer an audition. It was a moment, fragile and unrepeatable, unfolding in real time. As the song deepened, so did the emotion. His voice darkened slightly, rich with longing, carrying the ache of someone who knew what it meant to ask for protection, for guidance, for something greater than survival. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a confession offered without shame. By the time he reached the chorus, the room had surrendered. People leaned forward as one, drawn by a sound that felt both intimate and vast. Tears slid freely now, unhidden. A man in the balcony nodded slowly, eyes closed, as if recognizing something he'd lost long ago. Even the crew at the sides of the stage stood frozen, headsets forgotten. He held the highest note with astonishing control, letting it shimmer before gently releasing it, like setting something precious down instead of dropping it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with awe, with gratitude, with the shared understanding that they had just witnessed something rare. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No clapping, no cheers, just stillness. Then someone exhaled, audibly, and the spell broke, but the impact remained, echoing in every stunned face staring back at the man who had just sung a prayer and turned a theater into sacred ground. The silence cracked all at once, like a dam finally giving way. Applause surged up from the seats, thunderous and unrestrained, rolling toward the stage in waves that seemed to shake the floor beneath his bare feet. People stood instinctively, chairs scraping back, hands clapping above heads, some shouting, some crying openly now. The sound hit him harder than the cold ever had. For a moment, he didn't know what to do with it. He blinked, once, then again, as if the lights had suddenly grown brighter. His chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something dangerously close to relief. He bowed his head slightly, unsure whether gratitude or disbelief should come first. The noise felt unreal, like it belonged to someone else's life, not his. One of the judges stood, palms pressed flat against the desk, eyes fixed on him as though afraid he might disappear if they looked away. Another shook their head slowly, a stunned smile spreading across their face. Wow, someone breathed into a microphone, the word barely audible over the cheers, yet somehow perfectly placed. When the applause finally softened enough for voices to break through, he lifted his gaze. The judges' faces were no longer guarded or professional. They were open, raw, human. One leaned forward and asked gently, "Can you tell us your name?" He did. His voice wavered now, stripped of the control he'd held onto during the song. Saying his own name on that stage felt more exposing than singing ever had. "Where have you been?" another judge asked, not unkindly, not rhetorically. He paused, searching for a version of the truth that wouldn't collapse under its own weight. "Right here," he said finally, gesturing vaguely downward, as if the ground itself had been his address. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd at that. Soft sounds, murmurs, the quiet ache of recognition. They asked about his life, and he answered simply. He spoke of sleeping where he could, of singing where people would let him, of how music had kept him company when nothing else stayed. He didn't dramatize it, he didn't need to. The honesty in his voice carried the story just fine. A judge wiped at their eyes, then laughed softly at themselves. "That song," they said, shaking their head, "that wasn't just sung. That was lived." He nodded, throat tight, unsure how to respond. Applause broke out again, shorter this time but no less sincere. Then came the moment he hadn't dared imagine. A judge reached for the golden buzzer, fingers hovering for just a second, letting the tension stretch. The crowd sensed it instantly, breath held as one. When the buzzer was pressed, The explosion of sound was immediate, golden confetti raining down, cheers erupting so loud they drowned out everything else. He startled, looking up as shimmering pieces of light drifted around him, catching in his hair, settling on his shoulders, brushing his cheeks. He laughed once, a soft, disbelieving sound, and then the tears came without warning. He tried to wipe them away, but they kept falling, carving clean lines through the dust of a long road. The judges stood, clapping above their heads now, calling his name. The audience roared it back, over and over, as if they could anchor him to this moment by repetition alone. Someone shouted, "You deserve this," and the words struck him deeper than praise ever had. As the confetti continued to fall, he closed his eyes briefly and breathed it in, not the noise, not the spectacle, but the feeling of being seen. Not pitied, not overlooked, seen. When he opened his eyes again, the stage no longer felt like borrowed ground. It felt earned. Later, as he was led off stage, hands shook his, voices congratulated him, cameras followed his every step. But in the midst of it all, he glanced back once. At the empty microphone, standing quietly under the lights. He knew life wouldn't change overnight. He knew the road ahead would still be hard. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in a very long while, the world had listened, and it would never sound the same again.